like I said, survive incarceration, come home, looking for the job that's going to pay you six figures right out the door. While it has happened for some people, that wasn't my journey, right? Nor
No,
is it the average individual's journey. And
right.
so you cannot be arrogant. You have to remain humble. You will get no's, and that's fine. You got a lot of them when you were in prison, so continue to push forward. So that's all I did. I just kept going. And I started going until, I was like, all right, well, I knew how to speak. I wanted to share my experience, and I started creating things where I saw gaps. And that's just how I started. I try to find the solution that I believe that I need to create. There's no original idea. I think we all got to impart different ideas in many of us. And whoever gets to the door first is just, how it gets done.
What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassity. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind.
Welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? I know I sound like a broken record, but folks, don't forget to follow, subscribe, share this thing out, like it up. It really helps the show, and I really appreciate it. So who are we talking to today? I first want to give a shout out to Jessica O'Brien. Actually, Jessica's episode 184, incredible story of a judge she went through, fought a case and still fighting. But she connected me to Topeka Sam, and Topeka Sam is kind of like, I guess you would say she's like a celebrity to me. I follow her all the time. I'm so honored to have her on the show. I want to give you a little bit of background of what, and I was just talking to her before we got on here about how fast she has moved. She hasn't let any grass grow under her feet since she got out of prison. But here's Topeka Sam. She's a nationally recognized leader in the criminal justice reform category and dedicated to transforming the lives of women and girls impacted by incarceration. After serving time in federal prison herself, Topeka emerged as a powerful voice for change. She is the founder and executive director of the Ladies of Hope Ministries, an organization that provides housing, reentry, support, and advocacy for formerly incarcerated women. Her story and mission have been featured by major outlets, including the Today Show, CNN, the Tamron Hall Show, New York Times. Topeka has advised policymakers, including speaking at the White House and testifying before Congress to advance legislation on reform and second chances. Topeka was also granted a full pardon, presidential pardon, December 23rd, 2020. She's just passionate. She's fearless. She's inspiring. Topeka Sam represents resilience and purpose-driven leadership. Through her advocacy, she challenges the stigma of incarceration and builds pathways of hope, dignity, and opportunity for women returning home. Just a little side note, she also does a little film work, and that film work, she put together a film about Alice Johnson, and that film got a lot of response from people that caught the attention of Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian and Topeka teamed up, and they got Alice Johnson out of prison. Alice Johnson is serving uh, currently as the pardon czar in the Trump administration. So just a little extra stuff that she does. She helps people and recognizes stories and does films that catches attention of people and changes people's lives. So before we jump into all this, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you and negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all for service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. It's the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you.
Folks, I want to share with you a powerful and moving new book you won't want to miss. My Name is Saffron. Voices, silenced, stifled, and taken away by author Saffron Gustafson. This isn't just a story, it's a journey through resilience, survival, and reclaiming your voice after being silenced for far too long. Saffron's story takes you inside the hidden struggles, the pain, and ultimately the triumph of refusing to be defined by circumstances. As Saffron was putting the finishing touches on her book, the prison she had just been released from, Federal Dublin FCI, was permanently closed because of sexual abuse of the women prisoners. If you've ever wondered what it takes to rise from the darkness of places, to find your truth, and to speak it boldly, this book will inspire you. Pick up your copy of My Name is Saffron today, available now on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Trust me, you'll be moved, challenged, and changed by her story.
Topeka Sam, welcome in. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I am awesome, Brent. What an introduction, and what a little sponsor commercial too. That was cool.
Well, everybody has trouble when they go. I turn like into the most stupid person in the world when I walk into a car dealership. I think I kind of have it together, and then when I go try to buy a car, it's like I lose. You know, how do I get out of here? How do I get out of here with a car? Topeka, I am so just like blown away by you, what you've done. I could go on and on about what um, anybody wants to just check out your TED talk. It's amazing. I think you did that shortly after you got out of prison, and it was like you just
Mhm.
had it all together. And those stages of speaking, like with a TED talk is I've talked to people who've done it. It's stressful, and you just did it. And I I I think it was what, 7 years ago, so maybe 7 years ago. Um,
9. I mean, I just got out,
9 years ago.
the year
Yeah,
before,
9 years
so I
ago.
think it was in 2016, it was 2017, so 8 years ago. What is
2017.
it? 3
Yeah,
2017,
it was
8
a while
years
back.
ago it was, uh-huh. Yeah,
And
quite a while. I had just come
you were
home.
getting at that point, you were getting started and rolling and doing your thing. I want to go back a little bit so people can kind of get a flavor for where you came from, because you talk a lot about Topeka growing up as a kid that was, your parents were entrepreneurs, but you were the only Black family in the neighborhood. Uh, what was that
Mhm.
like for you growing up in that environment that, your parents did well? You guys had the swimming pool in the backyard, the American dream. How was that for you?
I mean, for me, it was all I knew. So, I thought everybody lived like that,
Right.
you know? I knew I was Black, obviously, but I didn't look at it like I was different, in that way, because I grew up with all of my friends. So I didn't know anything other than what I did. And when I went to the city on the weekends, my parents had us coming in the city. And so we would go in and we would, spend a little time at my father's or my parents' Carvel. They had a Carvel franchise in Brooklyn. So we learned about like, operating and owning a business. And then I went to Harlem School of the Arts and was classically trained in piano, flute, and dance. And so it was in Harlem, so there were more Black kids there. But again, we're all doing music and dance. And so I'm just thinking this is everyone's life, I didn't really see um,
Right.
outside of what was going on in different streets in Harlem because we would come right to go into into music school, then we would go back into Long Island. So I didn't really, know it was what everybody had. Everybody had a pool, because everybody had a pool on my block.
Yeah.
So,
Everybody had a
I
pool.
didn't really, I didn't really, it wasn't a
Well,
big deal, if you will.
yeah. And then the other thing that you were you were successful in a lot of things that you did in school. You're president of this, a president of that. So I mean, um, I guess you've always been that way. Do you think
Mhm.
that's because of your parents and how they raised you, and just the confidence that you had to just strive to be at the top?
Yes, and, I think that we're all born with different gifts, and different things, and so my mom said I was always that way, and so they didn't try to, I guess, mute me. They always allowed me to be who I was in personality. I always was the person to speak up. Even when I was younger, I was doing an interview the other day. They were asking me about like being an entrepreneur. And I said, when I was little,
Yeah.
my mother said I used to sell people advice. So I was like a little therapist and I would charge them $1 for advice. One day she just saw all this money balled up in my little purse. And she asked me where I got it from. And I said, oh, I was giving people therapy sessions and I charged them. So, it was just something, it was always just a thing for me. And it was just who
Yeah,
I
and you've
was,
always
just
been able to
always.
stand up for you've always been able to stand up for yourself. I think your mom at an early age, there was your brother, and she said you said in your TED talk, she wanted you to go get a diaper. She says, "You go get a diaper. That's your baby."
Yeah. So she always said, you always had a lot of mouth and you always, I was talking very early, above average in a lot of things. And, I just, as I grew and started to, understand who I was or just exploring more of who I was as a Black woman and wanting to understand that, life changed when it was time for me to go to college. And that's really, was I wanted to go to an HBCU, historically Black college, university, because I wanted to be now around other kids that were Black and that looked like me and, and learn more about who I was. And it was another culture shock. You go from one extreme to another.
Let's talk about that because I think that's when your life took a turn, um, because you had that entrepreneurial spirit and you got into dating people from the city, and those
Hmm.
people happened to be into drugs, and you thought, well, maybe that's an opportunity also, to figure out, how to work myself up this ladder and be someone that can be big in this space. Can you walk us through how that happened, Topeka?
Yeah, I can. I'm laughing now because I can laugh now, but man, I don't know what I was thinking. It's interesting. So, dating guys and they were selling drugs and just really thought they would always get arrested, and I'm like, they don't know what they're doing. Like, why aren't they doing it this way? And obviously, with men, often men don't listen. They don't want to take advice sometimes.
That's
Sometimes
right.
men
That's
know
right.
more and know everything, right? It is what it is. And so, at that point, I'm like, okay, as I'm watching and understanding, for me, it was just, okay, how do you get A to B? I wasn't the person that was going to stand on the corner and sell drugs. I was just like, okay, how do I get A to B? And how do I make that connection? So more like a broker, right? And so,
Hmm.
I was dating a guy and we were dating for a few years. He was much older, about 16 years older than me at the time. And, he kind of disappeared. Like he was living in New York. I was living in Baltimore and he disappeared for like probably a month. I hadn't heard from him, nothing. So I just basically went on, about my business. And when he came back, he told me that, somebody had robbed him basically and he would need to get himself together. And then I just asked him, well, what are you into? And he was like,
Hmm.
he sold drugs. And I was like, well, what do you sell? I was like, well, I might be able to help. That's how it started. And so I ended up calling a friend of mine at the time who lived in another state. And I knew that she dated a guy who was, selling drugs. And I asked her. So then I flew out there and she introduced me to the guy she was dating, who then made another introduction. And he had given me just like a little bit of cocaine, like a little ball. I don't even know what it was,
Hmm.
how much it was, any of that. So I flew back with it again, not knowing what I was doing. I flew back with it to Baltimore and saw some people that I knew and was like, hey, what do you think about this? And first they're looking at me like, where'd you get this from? What are you doing? And I'm just like, what do you think? So a friend of mine takes it and then he's like, well, if you could get it, get it. This is really good. It's a good product. So if you can get it, get it.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay. So I ended up telling the guy I was dating, that I had a connect is what they call it. And
Hmm.
so I went to go see the connect with him. And basically they had a conversation. I just, stepped aside and I thought I was doing something to help my man at the time, that kind of thing. Um, and you get in the good graces. Here I am, the younger girl who's helping my older guy who's been in this game for
Hmm.
so long and, all the things. So, you know,
Hmm.
who knows? But anyway, so I made the introduction to the people. He's having this big conversation about all the things that he can do. Next thing I know, he calls me months later, like in a frantic. And he's just like, you know, your people are here. Now, first of all, they weren't my people because I made the introduction. I didn't even know, right? And he's like, they're saying that they have product, but they won't give it to me unless, I come up with all this money. And I'm saying to myself, well, you told them you could. So
Right.
I end up renting a car, going to New York, meeting with them. And I'm just like, look, I don't have that kind of money for this, but if you get it to where I need you to bring it, I know that I can move it. And they did. And then that's how I found myself in the middle of selling drugs.
Wow. And the way I understand it is, Topeka, it ended up we got wrapped up into a conspiracy issue, but you were given probation on this first go around. Is that how that all kind of played out?
Yeah. So the
And then
first
you got
go
away from
around,
it.
I was right, so I'm doing all this stuff. There's a big story in between. We don't have enough time. Next time. But I end up getting arrested. I end up getting arrested with him. At the Now, mind you, this was cocaine that I was involved in selling,
Mhm,
and they found heroin in my house. Um, they found heroin, they found a gun, and I think some bullets that's somewhere else in the house. And so, because the apartment was in my name, although none of it was mine, you know,
mhm,
and the apartment was in my name and all that, obviously I'm the one that's held liable because at the time he was just like, when it came for his bail hearing. So, okay, they arrested both of us. They gave me a bail. My parents came and bailed me out. Then he had a bail. He had to bail himself out, which the attorney had stated he should have done it before that Monday because it was on a weekend. Because otherwise they thought that they would raise his bail because he had been from New York. Come to find out, he ended up having a detainer from a case that was like 20 years before. It was like a bunch of mess, like things about this guy that now I'm learning through this. But when we went to his arraignment, and I'm thinking at that time he would just take, responsibility. He was like, his argument with the lawyer that I actually paid for, let's be clear. He said that
mhm,
he was visiting a friend from out of town and he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. So this was the
mhm,
argument that he had made. And obviously I was completely shocked because I'm like, first of all, you
yeah,
had things in my house and I didn't even know that were in there. I
mhm,
would have never kept anything in my house. And so he was doing all this stuff unbeknownst to me. Um, and so then, I left him alone at that point. I was just like, when I saw that for my own eyes, I would have never believed it. I was just like, that's it. We both get charged. It ends up where the judge, he did finally accept responsibility, told the judge I had nothing to do with anything. And the
mhm,
judge found favor with me. The judge was just like, at that time during my sentencing, I pled it was a conspiracy and I think aiding and abetting, I think it was. And it was like a 5 to 20 year range, I believe is what it was at the time. It was the first case.
mhm.
And so the judge said at sentencing that my co-defendant had accepted full responsibility and he didn't think that I needed to do any jail time. So he sentenced me to, I believe it was 3 years of probation and told me in 18 months to come back in front of him and that he would reconsider taking me off early, which he did.
Wow. And the thing, Topeka, I was wondering when you're telling me all this is that you've been this wonderful star child to your parents. Did they know anything about this before this happened, or was this like a just Oh my gosh, what has Topeka done?
Everything. Well, first, it wasn't even that. They knew nothing. Nobody, my friends, nobody knew what I was involved in. But it was like, not what did Topeka do, is what did he do to Topeka? Right. So it was, you're dating this guy who's
Mhm,
older. How did this guy get you caught up in this? Right. Because there's no way that my daughter
mhm.
would have gotten herself involved in this. Right. Which in honesty, I did. I would never even put it on him.
Right.
I made the choice and decision to go do all the things that I did, irrespective of him introducing me to what this was. Obviously, I knew what it was because I knew guys who were, selling drugs, and I dated guys before him who had. But yeah, but that's what their thought was, and it wasn't like I corrected them. You know,
And
I
then
just was,
right. And then we fast forward, you get away from everything, kinda scared straight into this thing of not being involved in that, and then you get a
hmm
phone call, 6 or 7 years later, and it's a one-time
hmm
deal, and you think, "I'm gonna do that." What were you thinking, Topeka?
I was thinking, wait a minute. These are the same people that I dealt with before. They weren't the police. I knew how much drugs I had sold with them in the past. So I'm like, okay, I can make another connection, do this one run, get the money
Mhm,
that I needed. I had a business and I wanted to scale that business, and then I wanted to open another business. And so I was like, I can
mhm.
do this, make this quick money, and I can go on about my business. And they set me up.
So then this is a different deal because this is a federal thing. You're looking at real time, uh, what goes through your mind, and I don't think that you're given bail this time, is that correct?
That is correct. So the first case was a federal case as well. And so I remember
Okay.
getting there to my arraignment, and the marshals were like, wait a minute, like, you swam with the sharks before and got away with it, and you're back swimming with the
Yeah,
sharks again? And it
yeah.
really hit me because I'm like, I guess you're right. I never anticipated in a million years that, that I was getting set up, obviously, but all the signs were there, I would say. Um, but when I got there in the beginning, I thought no big deal. There were no drugs exchanged. This was only a conversation. I would
Mhm,
bail out like last time, all the things that I'm
mhm.
thinking. And the judge had another plan for me. And it completely shocked me because I didn't realize, one, that I could be put in prison for a conspiracy, being set up when I didn't even, it was like entrapment. It would have been considered entrapment hadn't I had a prior drug conviction, because that's
Mhm.
exactly what it was. But because I had a prior drug conviction per the law, it states that you're predisposed to do this crime. And so, I was like, well, if you have a person who's a drug dealer and you offer them from the same people that you worked for before, like 50 kilos of drugs again for free, what is a drug dealer going to do? Like, typically
Right.
so how is that not considered entrapment? But, we know the law, and the law is flawed. And so that was that.
So when you get into jail and you're being held there, really, as a lot of people are, you're being held to either plea or fight a case because you're not out on bail now, you're in jail. You had some experiences in there with that.
Yeah. And it was a lot of experience. One, I was in denial at first still, and thinking that, I would be able to beat this case. And my lawyer kept saying, Topeka, you're not above the law. You're not going to beat this case. You're going to do time, all these things. Um, and then I started having a spiritual kind of awakening. First I was not speaking to the other women who were inside because my friends and other people would be like, well, you're not like them, don't talk to them. And so I didn't. And,
Mhm.
I didn't think I was like them. A lot of the women who were there in the county jail were struggling in their substance misuse, different education level, socioeconomic background, different life experiences. And so we were not alike. But at that time, in my own, I guess, arrogance, I just felt that I was better than them. And there's no way that I would be, what is there for us to talk about? They don't know anything. That
Mhm.
was just where I was at that time. And as I started to once I realized I wasn't going anywhere for some time and I started to selfishly engage in programming just to give myself something to do because I was locked in myself for, hours a day, 21 to 23 hours.
Mhm.
Because as a federal detainee, they kept you separate than the people from the state or the county. And so we were I could not be out at the same time that they were out, basically. And so except when programming. And so, when I started going to these NA and AA classes and started actually listening, and then asking questions, it changed my life because I started realizing that, all the things that I thought prior with why people did drugs, the fact that, while I might have sold a lot of drugs, I never used drugs because I knew the impacts that
Mhm.
drugs had. I thought the same. If a person did drugs, it's because they wanted to do drugs and nobody was forcing them to do it. Like they had to take the act of going to buy the drugs. So until a sister told me, the reason why she started doing drugs is because her dad gave her drugs for the first time. He was raping her and gave it to her and told her to take it basically to shut up so the pain would go away. And it completely changed my life.
Mm. Wow. It's deep stuff. You then, Topeka, decide you're gonna plea, and I know that had to been like you're whenever you're doing a plea bargain and you're talking about conspiracy, there's so many ranges of years that they can throw at you. Did you know what you were looking at year wise and sentence wise?
Well, if I went to trial, I was looking at a minimum of 20 years. One, because I had the prior federal conviction, and two, because of the amount of drugs in the conspiracy. I was being charged with conspiracy to sell 80 kilos of cocaine or more. So that's
Mhm.
where I laid in the guideline chart. Then when I pled, I thought because even though I had the prior conviction, I still qualified for what they call a safety valve because it was like still recognized, like it was like a category one. I didn't spend any time in jail before. Like I met all the criteria. I accepted full
Mhm.
responsibility. So I thought the judge would give me a downward departure,
Mhm.
which means that, from the sentence, the judge would be able to at that time not give me the mandatory minimum. He could go under the mandatory minimum and sentence me to whatever. And really, I thought I might get a year and a day. I might get up to 5 years. That's where I thought I would fall in the range. I had done about 11 months at that time. And with programming, I was like, I'll
Mhm.
be out like in at least a year to 3 years. So I had
Mhm.
went through this understanding that this is what I was going to have to do. And this was basically my debt for all of the things that I'd done in my past. But at
Mhm.
sentencing, the judge denied my downward departure request and sentenced me to 130 months.
Wow. What was going through your mind when you heard that? So Topeka, the judge says 130 months. Obviously, that's not what was in your mind. Um, that's not what you were thinking. What was your reaction to 130 months?
Well, if I would have been able to pass out that time, I would have just dropped to the
Yeah.
ground. Um, I really thought I was going to do like a year and a day, maybe, because
Mhm.
I'm just like, yeah, I was set up. Okay, I had to plead guilty. Yes, I actually was conspiring, so I can take accountability, but how can they give me 10 years when they're the ones that pulled me into this, right? So I just couldn't. And
Right.
I cried And I asked, was I able to say anything to my parents? And I turned around,
Wow.
to my family and friends who were there. And I went to my mom and I was crying. And I'm like, I'm so sorry to my mom and dad. And my mother grabbed my face. And it was like her nose was here on my nose. And she was like, Topeka, if you weren't around the people that you were around doing the things that you were doing, you would not be here. So get yourself together. And I sucked up those tears and that snotty nose. And I was like, she's right, you know?
Mm,
And so I just went on back, and started crying again, obviously. And all the women, when I got back to the jail, they were shocked because they thought that I was going to be gone.
mhm.
And then they whisked me off to the next prison, Warsaw, and I started, my federal journey.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember you talking about a lot of people can avoid the, being transported as a prisoner is one of the worst things.
Mm,
And you speak about, being shackled, on Con Air, where the women were in the front, the men in the back, and you had to walk down that aisle shackled, and the men were groping you, and you were like looking at the person who's, I think she might have been a female marshal, and they said they told you, Topeka, not to say anything to them, but the groping was, and I remember the story. It was just so gripping, the story. And you went back
mhm,
in the bathroom in the plane and cried that, this is my world that I'm living in right here.
mhm, and I didn't understand how another woman could allow that to happen to another woman.
Yeah.
Um, and two, I had so many emotions. One, obviously, you're being violated, by men that you don't know, you know?
Uh-huh.
And the other end of it is like, damn, these men probably haven't seen a woman or touched a woman in decades? So it's just
Uh-huh.
like you feel bad for them while you're feeling bad for yourself. You're angry, but you can't say anything because you're told you can't. You're being treated like shit and
Cattle.
like
Yep.
if you don't matter.
Yeah.
And I just even throughout my entire time, there were a few, good eggs when I say officers.
Mhm.
But for the most part, I just don't know how people work in corrections. I just don't,
Yeah.
because they're actually working, they're living in the same conditions that you are,
Well, they're going to
like
prison every day.
a
Yeah,
hundred
they're
percent.
they're they're literally we're living there, but they're coming there every day to live with us.
That's right.
I can't imagine. I never
You
could
know,
imagine that.
and I would be
Well,
mad
let's
too,
oh
you know.
gosh, yeah, absolutely. Let's take a break there because when we get back, I want to talk about your time in prison and all the things that happened once you got out of prison through reentry and how you become so big in this space of reentry. Um, A lot of people don't like how they show up online. Many individuals think there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation on Google. Well, there's hope. It's called the Discoverability Company, and they can help you whether you're building a reputation from scratch or you're repairing your search results after a negative news story. Discoverability can also help you how you're portrayed on popular AI services like ChatGPT. To learn more, visit discoverability.co. It's called discoverability.co. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO course with coupon code Nightmare Success. And uh, Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you made it through to the other side, this is great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Mondays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to prisonist.org. Prisonist.org. Start here. Okay, Topeka. So you get to prison and you know you're going to be there for a while. Uh, what are your thoughts going in?
Well, at this point now, after I get I guess my mind right for a moment, it's just like, all right, God, what is it that you want to show me? What if,
Mhm.
I'm here, I'm open, I'm, a willing servant of you. I felt at that time, while man said 10 years, 10 months, God had a different plan. Like I knew that. I knew that
Mhm.
People like, "You're not supposed to be here." Like, I knew, though, while I may have been guilty, that I was not going to be in prison for 10 years. Like, I knew that without a shadow of a doubt. So I knew God had a bigger
Uh-huh.
plan. It was something else that I needed to do. And so I went in with that mentality. Every day I was working toward when I was going home. And the next day was when I was being released. So I always, just really smiled and I was really nice to people. And
Hmm.
because I learned a lot in that first 11 months in the county jail.
Yeah.
And I would just ask a lot of questions. You're not supposed to ask people in prison why they're there, but I did.
No.
Uh, because I wanted to know, like, what led people there, because nobody would ever think I would be there, even
Hmm.
in the same little uniform. They used to call me Gucci in the county jail because I used to walk with my collar popped up and, I had I had the waist cinched in my little uniform. So,
Yeah.
I, my
Oh, I mean,
swag was a little different.
if anybody watches Topeka's TED Talk, they can tell she's styling. She knows what she's doing with her clothes.
And that was a long time ago. So, you can
That's right.
imagine, right? So, it was for me, what am I supposed to learn through this journey? This is the only time in my life that I have to really focus on me. I'm not paying bills, I don't have to, take care of my home. I technically don't have to wash my clothes, don't have to cook any food, don't have to do anything except worry
Yeah.
about me. And so I just looked at that time, and I never looked at it as it was a place that was my home. Like, I
Hmm.
never had a routine, meaning when it came to taking a shower, I never used the same shower twice
Mm.
because I didn't want it to feel like, because people would be like, "This is my
You don't want to
shower."
get institutionalized. Yeah. Which is
Absolutely
so
not.
easy to do.
It's so easy because you're doing the same thing every day. I mean, my routine was getting up, praying, meditating, getting counted, going to the
Hmm.
track for an hour, taking a shower, going to prayer circle, going to work. Like,
Hmm.
then during lunch, I would go back to the track for an hour, come back to work. After work, I would go back to the track. Like, I was doing things just to keep my mental health, my spiritual, my body in shape because I was trying to take myself out of there. Every day, my friends would send me postcards when they traveled to take me out of there. Magazines I would read different things. I did work, whatever that looked
Hmm.
like while I was there.
Yeah.
But I just decided to use that time to take care of me.
Topeka, I think that's such a big tip. This show goes into 1,100 prisons, and I think the idea that you don't become part of that, that you still become. I was always worried about becoming prison Brent. I didn't even know what prison Brent was. I just didn't want to be him. And
Hmm.
one of the things I did was is I my youngest daughter sent me a calendar every year, and it had the pictures of the family, whatever, and I would write in there the win for the day in my little calendar, and I would try to find a win for the day. And then, you think, well, how can you find a win for the day in prison? Well, maybe you had a really good conversation with your kids on the phone, or maybe you got forklift certified at the whatever it was. And then if
Hmm.
I had a bad day, I would let myself have a no good, very bad day all the way down to, my toes bad. And I would write that in the box. But my thing was because I wouldn't let myself have two boxes of bad, because I knew that if I had two boxes of bad, that could turn into a week, it could turn into a month, and then I, had lost myself into whatever, prison Brent is. And I think your statement of not getting caught up and becoming that prison institutionalized feel, but you kept yourself open to the escape of your mind, keeping your mind active and continue to be Topeka. They don't take your mind. So that's the one thing you got to really work on to make sure that you don't lose that.
You have to. It's so hard because it's so easy if you're not connected. I always would feel so bad for people who didn't have family, who had been in
Yeah.
so long because their family is transitioned, or the relationships that they had were not healthy outside, so they didn't have people to come visit. I was really
Hmm.
fortunate and blessed. I often say I was privileged before prison. I was prison during prison. I had visits
Yeah.
every week. I maintain healthy friendships, my friends that are still friends today. Um, and you see it. And so people become what's inside because that becomes your family. Now don't get me wrong, I built great relationships to people who are inside because these are people you're going to be around and see every single day. You don't even
Right?
see your mom that much. um, you know, so
No.
it's like
Hard to
you
explain, really.
it is. And for some, this is the only family that you have, because of the relationships that you left behind, or lost during that time. Because you can forget people. It's easy to forget, and that's the unfortunate reality of incarceration. It basically kidnaps you from the street and then keeps you locked away in a cage where you're out of sight. You're
That's right.
hundreds of miles away from anybody who knows you,
Mhm.
typically, and people can't afford to take flights,
Right,
trains,
it's expensive.
drive, hotels, to travel across the country to see someone for a few hours every single week. So it is
Yeah,
incredibly difficult and hard on families. But while you're there, irrespective of what that situation is, you can't allow it to do what it's designed to do, which is break you. Like you've already been
break you.
broken through that process of pretrial, going through,
Mhm.
whatever your life was that led you to incarceration, right? But once you get to prison, then it's just like, what can I do with this time that I'll never have again in my life to focus
Right,
on healing, right? And that's something that comes from within. That's not going to happen externally, and try to make the best out of your situation. You can find gratitude in everything. Um, I don't believe prisons are places that anybody should be. It's a cage. We don't lock our
mhm,
animals up for the period and amount of time that you keep people in cages in prisons. It does not heal people. It's a dark place. It was the most traumatic experience that I've had in my life and think it will be. Um, Even from a survivor of domestic violence, of sexual assault, prison was worse than all of that put together. And I
right,
was in a camp and I was there 3
mhm,
years. But still, it was the worst experience. And so, as I think about people's mental health and I hear people who were locked in the shoe for years at a time,
mhm,
um, I'm just like every single person that comes out of prison has PTSD, whether you realize
mhm,
it or not. Um, and some go through more severe mental health issues than others. And I'm grateful to God that I was able to be sustained mentally, emotionally, and spiritually because of my own practices and the love of my friends and my family. Um, but it is harmful, on so many level. And there's nothing good about it. When I hear people like prison changed my life, I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it did, but there's nothing good. Like we should not find anything good in incarceration, period.
no,
We just
100%.
shouldn't.
I'm so, in agreement with that. Um, in reading about you, Topeka, there was you wrote a letter to the judge, and
Mhm.
I think it changed things, and I was
It did.
curious, like, how did you even know how to do that, to make that effort?
I would say God, right? Like, because everybody told me I was crazy. My lawyer said, like, do what you want to do, but nothing's gonna work.
Yeah,
Um, I had a friend that was in the law library all the time, and they had this thing called the Booker variance, which kind of led a line with what was going on with me being I could have gotten the downward departure at sentencing, but I didn't, right? Because I
mhm,
qualified for all of these. I think it's called the 3553, if I remember correctly.
yeah,
Um, and so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take my shot. Like my spirit kept telling me to write the judge, write the judge.
mhm,
And so, I said something to my lawyer first, and my lawyer was like, Topeka, you're not above the law. I said it again. You're gonna do this time. And but who keeps telling you to do this? I was like, God. He was like, well, I don't know what kind of God you serve, but you go ahead and write your little letter. And so I did, and I just wrote to the judge, and I'm like, where is that letter? Actually, the judge, I did get an opportunity to meet with him a few years ago, so I'm gonna
Mhm.
ask if he has that somewhere, because I actually would love to read it again. But I know that I shared with him just the experience that I had been through, my plans of what I
Mhm.
wanted to do when I came out.
Mhm.
It was clear God spoke to me while I was there, and I got called in the office, and then my case manager was like, "Your judge, you have a sentence reduction." And I was like, "What?" Like, I didn't even believe it myself. And then she was like, "And you qualify for the drug program." And then I asked her, "Well, what's that?" And she shared what RDAT was. And I'm like, "Well, I don't do drugs. What am I going to drug?" And she was like, "Look, this is the only program in the prison system that you can get a year off your sentence." And I was like, "Well, sign me up." I'm
Yeah,
going.
sign me up. I'll swim through that. Yeah.
And I went and I did RDAP and learned I learned a lot of things through there.
Yeah.
I got the
We're
year
both
off.
our dappers.
Well, all dappers. They did not
Yeah.
make me a senior guide. I was pissed off about that. Kept trying to get people to pull me up, all the things, but
I hated
they
those
were trying to
polos.
break me. They try to break me and all that, but I made it through. And I did learn a lot. I'd say I learned a
Yeah.
lot just about how people think. It's the way how I'm able. I still use my little RSA tool when I'm feeling
Yeah.
some type of way. So I will say it was, one of the helpful tools that I learned during my journey. And then a law passed, all drugs -2, and it qualified me for 15 months off my sentence. And because of RDAP, I was given 6 months early halfway house for early release. And they called me in the case manager's office and told me I was going home in 2 weeks. And I was
Wow.
like, wow, exactly.
Wow.
I was like, okay, God, I'm ready. And I didn't even call my mom. I called one of my best friends and I told her what I wanted to wear. And so she got it for me and shipped it there.
All
And
about the
so
clothes.
all about I gotta step out in style, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I
Well,
was
let's talk
released.
about, because you are a rock star in the reentry movement, and I think what we just talked about, how tough prison is, how tough it is before you go to prison, being investigated and going through that process and the whole unknown of that. And then you've got the unknown of going to prison and having to figure out how to live in that world that you didn't plan on living in. I think, Topeka, you are in the arena that is everybody's biggest surprise, is that everybody's so excited to get out of prison and get their second start, their second opportunity. And all of a sudden, there's 40,000 plus barriers that come at us. And they're like, oh no, what happened? How do I get back into society? How do I get back? How do I get a house? How do I get a banking account? How do I get a job? And these things don't really come to fruition until you get out. And you're like,
Mhm.
oh my God, I'm not getting back into society the way I wanted to because I can't do this and I can't do that. When you got out, you were such a force, such an early force in this movement. How did you do it?
Well, God, I always say I really meditated and prayed a lot when I was inside. And so I had a clear path. So like anybody who's listening who's inside, take that time to figure out what you want to do. Like, and just be still. And when it comes to you, whatever it may be, do it, because now if you've gone through prison, you can do anything. I'm a firm
Right,
believer in that. And so
right.
when I got out, I was fortunate enough that I was able to go back and live with my parents. So I had a safe place to live, right? That's number one for everybody. From there, I had friends and mentors. And so I was able to get a job quickly because one of my friends hired me, in a little part time job to get me out the halfway house because I was at the
Hmm.
halfway house first. And then I was able to go home. And then at the seminary, New York Theological Seminary, my mentor, which everyone should get while they're inside too, find a mentor. I was able to be a teacher's aide there. So it allowed me to be out of the halfway house from, I think it was like 7 in the morning. I was able to leave and I didn't have to get back until 11 at night. So that
Hmm.
was, allowing me to be out. So I started to be able to get some normalcy because it was hard being inside of a prison for 3 years and, around all women for the most part. Now I'm
Hmm.
interacting with men and that felt different, all the things. And so from there, I began to just put my vision in place. And I first went on, what's that, Squarespace, and got the domain name for the organization. I knew the name of the organization. I did that. I was I was computer savvy, anyway. So I was able to do little things on my own.
Uh-huh.
And then I started reaching out to people who had been in with me who were home because
Hmm.
I wanted to do work in this space, right? So I started to connect with people and then they started sharing like, "Hey, Columbia University has a program. You should check that out." Or,
Hmm.
there's a woman who's doing work similar to what you want to do. Check her out. And I started to do that, tell people who I was. Um and those are the things that I actually did. And so because of that, it was like I had to just really, really hunker down and block out the noise. That ex-boyfriend that I had got in trouble with, he started trying to rear his little head, but God would not allow that to happen. So I had to shut it down. That's another thing. Unless you're married before you go in, or have established a real healthy relationship with someone while you're in, you should not get in a relationship of any kind because it is a distraction. We know that. Like it is a
Yeah.
distraction. And so I had to curb that, and just stay focused. And while I worked for Instacart, which I hate shopping for groceries, I use Instacart today. I did things to keep me humble. I laugh and I was like, I was making like $14 an hour. I made more when I was working for my parents when I was 10,
Uh,
but at the end I had to remain humble. And so I just did things, to kids. I'm like, hey, I just was in prison making $9 a month. Like,
right.
so what? Let me do that. So I
Yeah.
think it's looking like your freedom, there's nothing in life that's more important than that, you know? And if you can, like I said, survive incarceration and come home looking for the job that's going to pay you six figures right out the door, while it has happened for some people, that wasn't my journey, right? Nor
No.
is it the average individual's journey. And
Right.
so you cannot be arrogant. You have to remain humble. You will get no's and that's fine. You got a lot of them when you were in prison. So
Hmm.
continue to push forward. So that's all I did. I just kept going. And I started going until, I was like, all right, well, I knew how to speak. I
Hmm.
wanted to share my experience and I started creating things where I saw gaps. And that's just how I started. I try to find the solution that I believe that I
Hmm.
need to create. And I'm always like, I believe God, there's no original idea. I think God will impart different ideas in many of us. And whoever gets to the door first is just, how it gets done. And so there
Yeah.
were other organizations that did reentry work. And so I would reach out. I would see the funders that I would pull 990s, look and see whose funders were there. I would then reach
Hmm.
out to those funders and just say, hey, I'm starting an organization. I saw that you funded a similar one. Can we talk? I just want to learn. And people like that. They like to teach, they like to share. And, I just did that. And I began to grow and build. And, you know, that's how it happened.
It's really something, Topeka, because I think people listening, the biggest nugget of wisdom that you've given is just do it. Get out there and do it. And if you have a passion about it, research what's around it. And I love the other thing that you do is you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. There's people out there
Mm-mm.
doing stuff. You're finding the gaps. And there's so many gaps that you've been able to fill these different gaps. And each time you've done it, you've been able to create more. And all the different things that you do, you're into housing, which, you and I were talking before this, we got on here today is just, housing is just such a big deal for people that don't have any connections that have a family or friends or whatever. How do you get a place to live? But you've gotten into that and the places that you've gotten into are so many different places that are needed, Detroit and Miami and New Orleans and all the different places that you're in. Um, and then you're into education and all these different things. Where do you see you've done so much? And the other thing I wanted to talk to you about before I was going to ask you that question. So you've been walking in and out of the White House, and you've been. What in the world does that feel like as somebody that's an ex felon? You and I were in federal prison, and you're just walking out of the in and out of the White House, and people are wanting to know what Topeka Sam is thinking. That's got to be, that's got to fill you up.
Yeah, it hasn't been until recently that I realized even like what a big deal that is, and
It's
I think
huge,
it's because of what was instilled in me as a child, right? Like am I am worthy and deserving to be in any space and anywhere. And your gifts will bring you there, right? And I think that for me, I've been invited into certain spaces because one, I know how to act in different rooms, right? Like, let's
hmm
start there. I don't come into spaces, even when I may not agree with the way people are showing up, with trying to scold people. I'm more about how do I teach people about things that they may not understand because I was on the other side of it. I was a person that looked at people the way people look at me,
right?
until I became one of those people. And so you can't judge people based on what they know. You can only share what you know in order to get people to change. So it's incredibly fulfilling to
Uh,
know that I can bring a group of women who've experienced incarceration into the White House, because I had the courage to ask when a person asks me, right? Like I wanted to create the space to invite other people in with me because we're stronger together,
yeah.
and we get more done and accomplished together. I've created a lot on my own, but when I have the right team, I
Oh
create
yeah.
so
And
much more, you know?
and Topeka, the for you saying that, there is something that's on, anybody can see it. It's on YouTube, and it was a tribute to you. Uh, I think it was your 5th year of freedom.
Oh yeah.
And there is like anybody and everybody that is in this space that is thanking you for helping them. And that to me, that's your superpower. That's been the thing that's gotten you to where you're at. It's not been about you.
Mm-mm.
You've ridden the tidal wave of helping so many different people in so many different spaces. And I saw that. I was looking at that last night. That's how you know if you're making an impact, is if these people are coming back at you and saying, "Thank you for helping me."
That's exactly right.
That's it.
We're
Yeah.
here, I believe, just from my, spiritual upbringing, we're here to serve, and that is why I believe I'm a servant leader. And when I am blessed enough to meet a person and a person entrusts me enough to support them, then I'm doing what's right. And I want to see a person do even more than me because I know that I've seeded that, right? Like,
Yeah.
so people so often are just like me, I. And I was her at one point in my life, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
But where I am now, it's like, no, I am so proud when I see my sisters being able to reach certain heights and brothers to do
Yeah.
certain things in ways that, I haven't because I know that I seeded that. I know that a lot of times I've even given people the courage to take it a step further because of what they've seen me be able to do. And while I did not own that, and someone told me recently, a friend and new business partner was like, Topeka, you have to own like your greatness. Like you are so humble when I'm like, tell you about yourself. And I don't, kind of pop my collar. I believe like self praise is no praise. Um, but I can't. Like I know I have literally since 2015, every single thing that has had anything to do with women, I have seeded. Everything.
Yeah.
And no one can
Yeah.
take that from me. I said, so no
Nobody could
matter
take it from you.
you can erase the
And there's
history.
Yeah.
Every single thing.
And there's so many things to look at of in just a short amount of time. I mean, the Alice Johnson story just on its own, not take away all this mountain of stuff that you've done, just that alone, that Alice Johnson was serving a life sentence and you put together a film that caught the attention of so many, and you and Kim Kardashian got her out of prison, and now she's the pardon czar. That should be a movie. But that's just, the reason I was so excited to interview you is that's just a little piece of all the different things that have happened. And you don't know that until you see all these different people on that tribute coming back and back and back again, talking about what you've had for them. What do you think, Topeka? Are you just going to stay in this space, or do you see yourself what do you see yourself doing?
Well, I mean, I am a social entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
So everything that I do will have some type of intertwining with the
Yeah.
system, right? But where I am in my life now, like I've done a lot of good. And so now I want to do well too, right? So I'm
Uh-huh.
like, you can do good and do well. So,
Yeah.
and the things that I'm creating now, while it is still going to have social impact to it, they're for-profit ventures, right? Because
I like
I'm
that.
like, and it's
Make some
time for
money.
Topeka to make some money. And, it's time for me to build my legacy.
Yeah.
And it's time for me to be able to take care of my family in ways that will last generations.
I love
And
that.
so that's where I am now. So, the newest company is called Epic Health PBC, and it's a telehealth platform, telemedicine, and pharmacy. And so while again, it offers, mental health support, I am going to pilot in prisons so that, for me, it was like, well, wait a minute. If a person is able to get a legal visit and see their
Mhm.
attorney, whether virtually, or why can't people pick their own mental health provider? Why
Yeah,
can't they
great
see
point.
them? Why can't they have access to that? So I looked and searched and I didn't find anything like it. So I created it, right? So
I
that's who
love
I
it.
am, right? And so from there, I was blessed to build a partnership with the pharmacy. And so we're able to make sure that people have continuum of care. From when they get out of prison, there's 90 days that people either relapse or their health deteriorates or they end up back in prison because they start using. And so now we have an opportunity where we can be a pharmacy fulfillment partner of prisons and people and probation and other organizations to make sure that people have that continuity of care. And so while we know the healthcare industry is $1 trillion industry, right?
Mhm.
And there are all these different areas to plug and play. I said, well, wait a minute. There's no need for me to leave money on the table. I could actually create a business that could generate money, but also still do good for people. So that's the newest thing. It's launching
I
next month. So look out for that.
I think that might be a billion-dollar idea right
It
there,
definitely is. I'm
Topeka.
excited.
It's a
It
big
definitely
one.
is. It is a big
Well,
one. I'm excited.
I always ask people on the show, with everything that you've been through, Topeka, and it's been a lot, what do you think's your biggest takeaway from all of it?
Well, there's a lot of big takeaways. Number one, God gives us nothing that we can't bear. Um, I'm gonna quote some scriptures. There's another one that says there's no perfect man, not even one. Um, you know, in all things, God does good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. And but by the grace of God, there go I.
Mhm.
So, this life experience can happen to any of us. It doesn't matter how high you sit or how low you fall, and anywhere in between. We can all go through experiences that may not be what we saw in our lives ourselves.
Hmm.
Accountability is so important at every stage of your life, irrespective of what has happened. But forgiveness is also, right? I could have stayed stuck, like I got set up, and all the things,
Right.
which was true
Yeah.
on one
Be a
side. But like
victim.
my mama said, if I hadn't been in the middle of doing this, I couldn't have got set up, right? So like there
Right.
is I always tell people two things can be true. It doesn't
Hmm.
have to be or, it can be and, right? And you have to also know what is that? There's another quote like to know thyself is true. Like to know you have to know yourself better than anybody. I know Topeka. No one can say they know me better than I know me. And
Hmm.
so as long as I'm able to get up in the mirror now and be proud of who I am, irrespective of the things that I've done, good and bad, because I haven't always been the best person in the world. I sold drugs. That's not being a good person. You know what I mean? Um, but I'm a great person now. And every day I strive to be a better person. And, with that, it's hard. And with that, I got haters. People have tried to destroy me and the things that I've created, but I
Hmm.
know that I'm doing God's work. And so I know that it wouldn't be easy, but I know that God would always get me through. And so, we have to walk in the confidence that God gives us, and it doesn't matter where you've been. It's all about who you are today, who you want to be, and be humble in all things, like always. Don't forget where you come from, because it's easy for those of us who've left prison now 10 years, who is doing, fairly well for myself.
Hmm.
I could forget. I could easily start. I could have started this business and not thought about the people that I've left behind, right?
Yeah.
Easy, but it's not in me, and part of it keeps me safe too, because as long as I have a daily reminder of where I've been, I will never go back, because again, when nobody is perfect.
Wow. All that's really good, Topeka. And I was thinking another thing that you said, to use one of your quotes, is that the conviction is a thing and I'm a being and I want to be known for the things that I'm doing, not for that one thing. And that
Mhm.
you live that. And I think that's so important for all of us that have been through a thing that doesn't make you who you are. That's a part of
No,
who you are. And I think, you know, you're inspiring and you
thank
inspire a lot of
you.
people. I think Van Jones said, if you aren't inspired by Topeka Sam, you need to go have your heart checked. Um, I,
That's my
I,
guy.
uh, I, I want to give a shout out to Homestead Financial Home Mortgage. Lets me use this podcast setup. If you're looking for a book out there, I've got one: Nightmare Success, Loyalty, Betrayal, Life Behind Bars, Adapting and Finally Breaking Free. Leave me a review on Apple. You got time. Go to brentcassidy.com and see what I'm doing, but I spell it wrong. I spell it with a TY, not a DY. As I used to say, right, my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Topeka Sam, you are something else. So glad that you were here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Cassidy with a TY and not a DY. It was such a great honor. I get interviewed a lot, but it's nothing more fulfilling for me than to be interviewed by someone who has lived what I have lived. And so thank you for creating this platform for us. 4 seasons strong. It's awesome. I know how hard this is. I had a show too. So, for you to make it this long, that is awesome. Keep going. Just keep doing God's work. Thank you.
Thank you, Topeka. Nightmare Success, in and out.